In this video, I'm going to show you how to import a character from the Mixamo Character Creator into CRYENGINE. By the end of the video, you'll have a fully rigged and skinned character with animations that you'll be able to use and play with in CRYENGINE. In order to follow along with the video, you're going to need a copy of CRYENGINE 5.4. You'll need Autodesk Maya 2016 or 2017. Other versions may work, but I can't guarantee this. You'll need Autodesk Motionbuilder 2016, which will be handling import of the animations. And optionally, you'll need the FBX tool that I wrote, which just does a few handy little things, but we can bypass that. If you want to use the FBX tool, you can find it on GitHub in my repository under FBX tool. This video isn't going to cover how to make a character in the Mixamo Character Creator. That's pretty simple and it's already covered online in a whole bunch of other videos. So we're going to just jump straight into actually doing something useful. Now, I've already made a character in Mixamo and I've dumped it into my assets folder for the project. And I like to keep the original character separate so that I don't mess up. So here's a human male. Previously I've done a human female, and I'm just going to repeat the process, and this video is going to show you what the steps are for that. The first step is to simply copy the asset down to the FBX tool folder, and we can start processing it. Yes. Now, the FBX tool is a command line tool because I couldn't be bothered writing an interface more sophisticated than the command line, and it's pretty simple to get started with. Just throw in a command similar to this and hit enter and it'll process. Breaking that command down a little, it's running the tool from the debug folder because I've been interactively developing and building the tool as I figured out what I needed to do. And then you can see it's taking an input. It's saying human male FBX is the input file. -O is the output file, and it's just going to dump that straight into my assets folder for me. And -V is telling it to be verbose. -J is telling it which joints file to use. And the joint file is just a simple renaming file, which I was using before I discovered you could remove namespaces quite easily in Maya and in Motionbuilder. But in addition to renaming or removing a namespace, it can actually rename any joint to any other name, which is good because a couple of the Mixamo animations were using different joint names. And -F is for Fixamo, which is just going to do a few extra little jobs for us on the FBX file. So let's give it a run. Now it uses the FBX SDK to load up the file, renames all the joints if they need renaming, and then saves the file out again. At this point, we're ready to open up the file in Maya and see what we've done with it. So you want to, before you actually get started, make sure you're on the rigging workspace. That's just more convenient for something a bit later on. Make sure you've set your settings so that your animation, you're in the Z-up, and that your time is 30 frames per second. And the time slider is also set to 30 frames per second. Now you want to be in Z-up because CRYENGINE works in Z-up, and it's just easier to get everything right if you stick with the Z-up in Maya. You can do it with Y-up, but I didn't have much success. Right, so it's time to import. You go to File, Import. And keep it in Objects, Characters, Human. And this one's going to be Male. I'm going to try, remember I'm doing the human male this time, not the human female. And as he imports, you'll be amazed at all the time and effort I spent making this character. And there we go, he looks like crap, but good enough. Now I did automate a few tasks, but unfortunately I didn't work out how to automate putting all the blend places into a group, so Just select them all like that, hit Control G, and it puts them into a group for you. Double click, and then not blend spaces, these are blend shapes. And I just mean blend shapes, that gets them out of the way, because otherwise they're all just there in the root. So now we want to start processing things, and we're going to start with the hips, which we hit Shift P to deparent them. And that'll just keep them from getting moved around, and I'm going to deparent the root as well with Shift P again. On the root proxy, if you come over, you see the 90-degree rotation on the X. That is not meant to be there. Zero that out. And middle mouse button click, hold down, drag root, you drop back onto the proxy. That's nicely zeroed out. And same again for hips. Now, I didn't actually have to just drop those back in place. I could have done something, the next step, without doing that first. The next step is we need to use the tools, the Cry tools, and we want to create a scene root from the model's front, I believe. There we go, that looks right. The root's pointing out the front, just the way you should expect, so you can take the forward and up arrows out. You don't need those for the moment. Now click on the scene root, and if you look over here, you can see it's got a rotation of 180 degrees on the Z. What we need to do is make the rotation on root exactly the same as the one that's on the scene root. So once again, Shift P to deparent the hips, put the 180 degree rotation there, middle mouse button, click, drag her back, and that should be ready. The next step is to use the Cry tools, which are up here on this toolbar, and we're going to take our hips and deparent those by hitting Shift P. We're going to take the root and deparent that as well by hitting Shift P. Now, this is the area where things are most likely to go wrong for you. It's the area I've had the most trouble with. There's a few things to note. Firstly, the root proxy, for some reason it gets a 90-degree rotation on the X. We don't want that. Zero that out. The root, if you zoom right in, if you look carefully and you have a look at the widget down here showing which way the XYZ is, that should be set to your Z up. And you look at this one, you see they do not match at all. So there's a little bit of a rotation here. If that's not displaying, go to your display, transform display, local rotation axes. Now, pull up your attribute editor, and you can see on the joint that we've got a 90-degree rotation again. You want to zero that out. Now, if you look at it, the orientation is in the proper Z-up orientation, and we've got all this zeroed out. So the next step is we want to create a scene root. Now, usually you're going to want a scene root from the model's front. Bingo. That green arrow should be pointing forward in the model's point of view. Now, we can get rid of the forward and up arrows. We don't need those. What we really need is the rotations that are on the scene root. And if we look, we've got a 180 rotation around the Z on the scene root. So we've got to replicate this over here on root. So go to that, rotate that by 180, and we can now reparent hips back onto the root. So hold down your middle mouse, drag it, and release it onto root. Now we want to get some exports happening. So we want to start with root and create a Cry export node. Don't call it root like that, because you'll get a conflict on the naming. So you want to call it, in this case, human male. It'll also be the name of the file that it exports, and we're exporting a character file. Good. Next step, we'll need some meshes in there. I'm just going to export all the meshes, so hold down the middle mouse button, drag, and release onto that node that you just created. Now this is going to throw all the meshes into the character file, so you won't need external skin files or anything. And while we're here, click and select all of the meshes, and then go to the material editor and tell it to create a group from the selection. And unsurprisingly, we're calling it human male, and that's going to be a material called human male. Now it would be good to finesse it a little and maybe use the hair shader and the skin shader and a loom for the clothing or whatever, but it's not important, so I'm not going to cover it. Now if we've got everything pretty much right, we can go to the validate, and you can see when I cry validate I do get one warning, and that's just because there's too many skinning influences. The maximum is 8, it's preferable to have 4, and it took a little while to figure out how to get rid of this, but just click the focus button and that'll focus all the skins, not the skins, but all the points that need a little bit of attention. And then you just go up here, make sure you're in the rigging, go up here, skin, and tell it to prune the small weights, and it's off screen, but here we go, we'll drag that on. Just prune it below a very nice small figure. I'm going to go that much, and we try and validate again, and done. It's all fixed. So that model is ready for export now. Around about now I like to make a paranoia save, so just in case something goes wrong, and things have gone wrong hundreds of times. So I like to save the file out to a Maya file, and it's probably actually needed to do that anyway, because a lot of the time the exports don't work if you don't save. So just calling it humanmale.mb, saving as Maya binary. So next step is export, so click the export and bring this little doohickey over here. And I don't do anything particularly fantastic here, I just hit the export all button and just hope it all works. Now, blend shape model can only have one mesh. That pops up a lot. I don't have the animating or modeling skills to fix it, and I don't care enough because I'm not doing facial animation at the moment. But it's not going to stop it from exporting in any case. So we just sit and wait while the resource compiler does its thing, and we get a ton of these. But again, those are the blend shapes. And there's no errors down here, so that exported correctly. So if we dismiss that, and if I can pull up a copy of File Explorer somewhere. If we look over here, we should see that's not there because I haven't copied yet. You should have a character file and a crying asset file in the asset source file now. It's important to notice that the this is assets_source that I'm working, where I keep all the Maya files, the FBX files and things, and once I'm done working with that, I'll copy those files over into the actual game directories. Now if we have a look at the game directory here for human male, you can see that at some point I've actually had a stab at making a human male, and that is in fact the Motus human male. Well, he's not human, that's the Motus character. So what we're going to be doing is replacing some of this with the files we've got, and in fact, seeing as they're here now, you can copy and paste those over the top of the files. That is going to ruin all the animations and things that I had in place. So all of those can go. I'll replace those later with the new updated ones. And if we look at the human animal events, there's nothing interesting happening in that. So that. I suppose I should generate material files. I don't really have to bother with this because I already have material files elsewhere, and I tend to edit the XML. It's just easier for me. But if I do that, that should have saved the material file. And you can see that there's an MTL file in there now, which, if you have a look, this is probably a reasonable MTL, but I'll be replacing it later with one that I've done for the human female, and just changing the word female to male. It's probably quite tempting around about now to go into CRYENGINE and have a look at how your export turned out. It's worth having a look, but it's not going to look quite like you want yet. So open up Animation Character Tool, and there's our human female. She's going to work as our prototype for what we're doing here. And there's human male. Now he's got the skeleton that we just set up. That's all looking good. And he's got at least part of the skin. I don't know what happened to the rest of the skin. I'll have to look into that a bit later. But there's nothing worth worrying about there. It's probable that the material just isn't set up correctly, so we can worry about that later, or not even worry about it at all. There's a million tutorials on how to set up a material. If you can't see the skeleton properly, just throw on your display options like that. Select the joints and joint names if you need to know the names of them. Now he won't have any animations because I just deleted them all, but effectively, once we've done this process, he'll have all the same animations that the human female's got. Now that'll include all the ones from the Motus Mobility Pro, including, let's make him run, or make her run. So your character will start to be able to do things like running, and you can see she's got correct root motion. The root motion is dead steady, staying on the ground, even though she's doing a run and jump. We've got all sorts of animations here now. And those have all been brought into the system using Motionbuilder, which I'll get to in just a moment. I think I'll take a moment now to discuss why I'm doing this much more convoluted import process when the FBX import is available these days. And the reason is that I haven't had very much luck actually getting fully animated characters and rigged into the system. If I try and drag and drop onto the character tool, it's completely broken in that it gives the wrong path, like the path isn't appended correctly, and it doesn't even get a chance to try and even open up the FBX file. If I try and do it in parts, like pull in the skeleton in one part and skin files in another part and that, I've seen errors with it reporting that there are multiple roots on the skeleton, and I just wasn't able to successfully do it. So I've spent a lot of time looking into how to do it the other way, the longer, harder way. And one of the side bonuses is that if you've got a lot of animations you want to pull in, for instance, you're pulling in from, say, one of those big animation motion capture sources where they've got, say, thousands of animations you can use. If you're willing to spend the time to learn how to do it like this, and you've got access to Motionbuilder, you'll be able to pull all those in pretty easily. And of course, the major point is that you'll be able to retarget those animations. So if your characters are different sizes, like my characters have got a male character and a female character, and they're different heights, though pretty much the same proportions, then you're going to need to retarget those animations in any case. In this next step, we're going to look at taking the model out of Maya and bringing it into Motionbuilder. And this is where we're going to start using the root proxy again. And this step has a propensity to go wrong. In fact, it went wrong the last time I did it because I simply didn't write good enough notes on how to replicate the step. Now, if you get this step wrong, the next 20 or 30 steps that you do will appear to be correct, but the end result when you export into CRYENGINE is also going to be wrong. And the first time I recorded this video, I made a small mistake in the way I changed the rotations, and it looked great right up until I put the CAF files into CRYENGINE and the guy was standing 180 degrees rotated around the Z. I had to go back and write a better set of notes for myself, so hopefully it goes properly this time. So what we're going to do is our root proxy is going to come back into action. So we take our root and middle click, drag, and reparent the root back onto the root proxy. Now if we have a look in our attribute editor, you can see we've got 180 degree rotation on the root. And we don't want that. We want all the rotation zeroed out for this next step. And if you check down at the joint, you wanted all the joint orientation zeroed out as well, but they should have already been zeroed out previously. So take that rotation and remove it from the root. Go to the root proxy instead and put the rotation onto the root proxy now. Your model should be left standing in the same pose, facing the same direction as it was when you exported the character. So we click root proxy to select that. If you haven't got it selected, click the meshes to select that, and then go to the select menu and select the hierarchy. You want to make sure you get all of the meshes and all of the skeleton. Then you want to go to File, Export Selection, and it takes a little while on mine, not quite sure why. And we're going to export this to a different file than humanmale.fbx. I typically call it humanmale_base.fbx, and it indicates it's the base file for the next step that I'm going to be working on. I've already done it at least once before, probably about 50 times by now. Export that selection, replace it, and we should be ready to go into Motionbuilder now. Now, you don't want to save it with root proxies like that, so just throw away any changes that you've made. Don't save that file. And by don't save that file, I mean don't save the Maya version of the file. Now we're able to start on the next stage, which is to import the character into the Motionbuilder. So open up the character FBX file you exported, which should be human male base. Rename that to T-pose. And what you should see is the character loads up. He's facing correctly down the Y. Oh, sorry, he's facing in the Y up, down the Z, like you'd expect. And he's all ready to start the next few steps on. The next steps involve characterization of the, character, I guess. And this is where the FBX tool becomes more useful. If you've got the Mixamo character straight from Mixamo, you'll have a namespace. So they'll have Mixamo rig : and then the bone name. And that makes it much harder to characterize. You have to make a character template first. But if you strip off the namespace first, then you're able to just use the character template that Autodesk uses. Mixamo do use that, but they use their namespace to prevent collisions. So if you've done that using the character tool, using my FBX tool, then you should simply be able to characterize it by going over here to your templates, your asset browser, get this little character guy, drag him here onto the root, to characterize that it's a biped, and you should now have a character here, which I'm going to rename Mixamo Character. Now, I'm not going to cover characterizing and retargeting in much depth because it's already been covered about as well as can be done by one of the guys at Motus. He's put up this video here, which I will put in the link for this, which will step you through the process that you need for when you're going to retarget animations onto characters of different sizes or characters of even the same size. And it's a pretty interesting video and well worth the watch. Before we go on though, we need to make a small change to the Mixamo character as it was characterized. If you look at the definition here, you can see that it doesn't have a reference. And what we need is to set the root as the reference. So come over here, press that lock, that'll unlock it. And if you double click on reference, then come over to your scene and click on the root, it will set root as the reference. And you click this little lock again, characterize it as biped, and we're all ready to go. So the next step is we want to add our next step is to add a character extension, which if you go to your characters, select your Mixamo character, right click on that, and tell it that you want to create a character extension. And it doesn't look like it's done very much, but if you add a property view and click on the character extension, you can see it's there. Of course, that's not so useful yet, but what we do is we click on the root and we Alt drag, we Alt left click and drag that down onto the character extension. And it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole game. And now, if you click on a character extension, you see that we've put property references on for the root, translation, and the rotation. I usually like to save my progress around this point because we've got them all characterized and ready to go, and the next steps will be involving applying animations to them. And things can go wrong there, so now is probably a good time to save your work. At this point, I'm going to merge in another character with some animations, and this is very much a matter of here's one I made earlier. This is the Motus character with some animations, and you can see the locomotion one that I've made there. What I've done is I've run them through the FBX tool that's renamed all the animations because I didn't like having mob1 underscore and all that in the animation names. It was able to bulk process all of them and rename each file so that it matched the actual animation, or actually, sorry, the other way around, each animation within the file to match the file name. And prior to doing that, I run a regular expression parse over the thing to rename all the animation files to something a little more suitable. And once I've done that, I took all of those animations, all the separate files, and I have imported them into Motionbuilder and called it locomotion because those are the various locomotion ones. I've done the same thing here with the conversations. That's about 30 or 50 conversation animations. Locomotion has, I believe, about 330 different animations in it. And the reason for doing that is because it just becomes so much easier to do bulk actions on the animations, in particular retargeting, which we're going to be looking at very shortly. But rather than have it have to churn through 330 odd animations every time I made a pass through, I made a much smaller file where it's only got, say, 4 animations in. So I'm going to merge that in with current dude, including the T-pose. And at this point you might apply namespaces and things. I don't have to do that because the namespaces won't conflict. But drag that in, and if we scroll around a bit, we should see one of the Motus guys there. Is it either an older looking Motus guy or a newer looking one? But the skeleton's in place. Make sure your display is on X-ray. And we could, to make it easier to see him, we could take, where are you? Not the blend shapes. We could take the meshes, and it looks like I've dicked up and accidentally pulled in the Cry export nodes. I didn't mean to do that. It shouldn't be too hard to fix that if it happens to you as well. But we can take these meshes here and flick those off. Display height selected. Now we can see our Motus guy. And we can see our skeleton is overlaying his reasonably well. They're pretty close, so this is not exactly going to be a hard retarget. But it's easy enough to do it with skeletons that don't match either. They're vastly different in size, and I'll show that a little bit later. Show selected again. At this point, we want to set the skeleton so that the Mixamo skeleton is going to use the Motus skeleton as its source. It's pretty easy to do. It's getting a little crowded in here. But just select the Mixamo skeleton, double click on it. Properties can probably go somewhere else. Actually, we don't need that, and we don't need that, so they can overlay here. Yeah, double click on the Mixamo skeleton, click that active button, tell it to use a character instead, and it's going to start pulling its stance and animations from the character. And the only option that it's got is the Motus character, so it very conveniently sets that for you straight up. Now, it's probably tempting to jump into one of the animations and have a look, watch it play. So click that and that. That should get it repeating. I usually like to watch them in slow-mo. Yeah, that's the ticket. And you can see that they're pretty much doing what they're meant to do, except that root motion isn't coming across, and that is the nub of the problem. But it's pretty easy to fix. All we have to do to fix that is to drag a parent-child constraint onto the Mixamo character. But before we do that, you want to make sure that you're in a T-pose, because we're going to have to snap some constraints in a moment. And if you're really paranoid like I am, I usually go back to frame 0, which makes absolutely no difference whatsoever, and yet I still find myself doing it. So we need a constraint, and the sort of constraint we need is a parent-child constraint, which we are going to drop onto the root. So click that, drag it, and drop it over here onto root, constrain that object, and we should see we've now got a lovely parent-child constraint on root, and we need to set a source for that. Now we're going to need to set the Motus root, or the Motus reference, as the source for that constraint. So we have to find that little bastard. And there it is. Motus reference. Just drag and drop that onto here and set it as the parent. Make sure you snap. Now if you snap when you're in the middle of an animation, the offset that you've just snapped to is going to be completely wrong. That's why you need to be in the T-pose before you do this. Now let's scroll down, see if we can find that constraint. This user interface is a little bit messy, so it can be a bit hard to figure out what you're doing sometimes. Now double click the constraint, and if you've got a property window, which I usually keep off to one side, at this point you're going to want to come in and adjust the constraint axes. In the video that Motus has put out, you see that he hasn't had to constrain the axes, but he didn't import into CRYENGINE afterwards. And I found that if I don't constrain the axes, if I don't change the Y translation, if I don't flick that off, then the Y translation, you'll see that during the jump C, the root node goes up above the ground. And unfortunately that doesn't make it into the engine in quite the way that you would want. And it makes it look like the person who is doing the jump, they stay flat to the ground, the root node stays on the ground, and they just sort of compress up a little bit and then decompress a bit, and it looks quite weird. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it not to affect the Y translation. This will stop it jumping up in the air. The net result of doing this is that within the engine, say you've got an animation where they're going to run and jump up in the air, the root node will stay on the ground and the character will jump up, and the distance between the root node and, say, the hips is going to be expanded. It looks right in the engine, but it might not be the right thing to do. In any case, for the moment, it's good enough. Now, it's quite important that we go to the character, the Mixamo character, and that under retargeting you select match source. If you don't do this, your IK targeting and things on hands and feet are going to be off. The character's feet are going to look like they're slipping. They go into it in much more detail in the video that will be provided in the link below. So if that's in place, we are ready to provide some animations. Now we're finally going to use that root proxy. Our character actually matches the size of the Motus character pretty well. So we could probably even get away without using the root proxy for this one. But when I was applying it with the human female character, the match wasn't so great. Now, if you apply a scaling factor to the root, when you go to retarget the animations, that's not going to work so great. So what you do is you apply the scaling to the root proxy, and you want to make the character that you've got pretty much match as closely as you can to the Motus character. And we're looking pretty good there. And that will make it much easier for the retargeting algorithm to do its job when it's trying to position hands and feet. And that's in particular when you're interacting with, say, a button at shoulder level, or for foot planting. Any scaling that you place onto the root proxy now, you need to remove later once you go to export. So it looks like we've got pretty much a 1-to-1 scale, which is just damn lucky. So, hang on. So we won't have to bother with that for the moment, but I'll show you the steps anyway. Once you're happy you've got the the root proxy scaled so that your skeletons match pretty well, it's time to actually plot the animations. So you come down to your Mixamo character, and then you click this plot character button, and you want to plot to the skeleton. You can plot it to the control rig if you're planning on doing some changes to the animations later, but the simplest method is to go straight to the skeleton. Plot all the takes. That will take all the animations that are in your combined animation file. In this case there's only 4, but if I was doing the real locomotion animations, it'd be those 330 odd ones. Make sure you're at 30 frames per second, and just hit plot. And if you sit back and wait for a little while, that will plot all the animation. Oh, that was a hell of a lot quicker than I was expecting. Now you need to turn off the parent-child constraint. If you don't do this, bad things will happen. So double-click your parent-child constraint and click the active button so it's turned off. And at this point, you should find that if you switch your animations, you can choose any of those animations. Let's choose the worst and play them back, and both of your characters should be animating a treat. And you should be able to see that the root is running along and matching up the way you'd expect it to. If you've managed to get this far, then it's time to export. But before we export, it's a good idea to just clean up all the crap that is in here. You will need to get rid of the Motus character and any of the Motus animations. So, right, click on Motus reference and Motus geo. Come down here, click on the Motus character, and we can get rid of that parent-child constraint. That's no longer needed. I think that's all of them. And having clicked on those, you want to right-click and expand to selection. Nope. Select the branches. Yeah, select branches. And what that's going to do is select all of the the leaf nodes and things. And then you can right click and delete, and you will have to say yes quite a lot of times to a bunch of stuff. Delete the character, delete this, yes to all that, yes, that can go. And if you've done all that, then you should just be left with your character, which has got all the animations plotted correctly onto it. And thankfully, that's exactly what we've got. And let's speed up, and there we go. So if everything went well, we're now able to export these animations with the character. So go to Open Reality, Tools menu, CRYENGINE 3 Exporter, funny it's not CRYENGINE 5 Exporter, and Export Animations. Now, you should get a little pop-up. Mine is off screen. But it should just run through, and for each animation it's going to make a little DAE file, some zip files and things. And then it's going to call the resource compiler and compile all the animations. And if everything went well, you shouldn't have too many errors here. I tend to get those each time. They don't seem to stop it from working. So if we go down to, oops, have a look at what's in our asset source, and there we go. We should see a CAF file and a cry asset file for each of the animations that were just imported into Motionbuilder. And you can take those, copy, well actually I'm just going to move those, dump them into the animations folder, and we should be able to test those in a minute. So now it's time to fire up a copy of CRYENGINE, which I just right click on my project and launch the editor. If everything went perfectly and I got all the instructions completely right up to this point, then I should just be able to come into this character tool and open up the new male character. He's got a CDF that was created earlier. Now he's got some animations, so these should just play, and they do, but they're backwards. So apparently there's a mistake a little bit earlier on. It's probably the rotations on the root and the root proxy before sending them off into Motionbuilder. So I'll have to go back and correct that. I went back to the section of the video where it was most likely I made the mistake, and it was what I suspected, which was when I reparented the root onto the root proxy. There's a specific way it needs to be done in order for the rotations to come through correctly. Now, through the magic of video editing, I've gone and corrected that section, so you'll never see the mistake. You'll only see the results of the mistake. And if we look at our guy now, we can see that running any of these animations after being corrected, they will happily run in the direction you're expecting, forward, and jump correctly without compressing the jump down, because we've got the root motion targeted correctly. Now that's the bulk of the work done. Obviously there's work on cleaning up the character, fixing up the materials, getting the texture maps out of the FBX, but that's all covered elsewhere quite nicely, so I'm not going to cover it here. There is one more thing that has gone wrong a few times, and I'll see if it goes wrong this time. When I'm exiting out of here, yeah, it's happened. It hasn't offered to save the anim settings files for me, and without the anim setting files, the animations won't turn up properly when you go to search for them in the user interface in CRYENGINE. So we're going to have to do a little fix for that. So I'm going to close CRYENGINE for the moment. The easiest way to fix it is to use PowerShell. Now you can start up a copy of PowerShell by holding down Shift and then right-clicking in a folder in the Explorer. Open the PowerShell window here, and that'll get the PowerShell right in the directory that you want. Now, if PowerShell was decent, I would be able to simply open up Notepad and tell it to open up that particular file, which should be in my Documents folder, but it can't do that. But what it can do is, if you just move your cursor here to where it says Documents and hit the Tab button, it will auto-complete that to the actual file path, and now you see that you can edit the anim settings file. Now this is just a template, and in this particular case the template was made for the human female, and all I'm doing is going to switch that skeleton alias to human male and save that anim settings file. The other settings are all pretty standard, so just leave them as they are. And once you've done that, you can copy and paste this particular command, which is going to recurse through the folder, and for every file that it finds that matches the ICAF glob, it will create an anim settings file. If we have a look, there we have them. And we can have a look at any of these particular anim settings files, and they should just have exactly what you'd expect of them. It's simply copied a copy of the template. Just be careful if you choose to use that method to create the anim settings files that there aren't existing anim settings files, because this is just going to completely blow them away and replace them with whatever was in that template file. If we reopen the engine, we should see that everything is still working as expected. Now the anim files won't make a difference to what shows up in this character tool, or sometimes it can actually, but it does make a difference to which animations are going to show up when you're using a browser. You say you're selecting a particular animation on a character or a CDF that you have. Without these anim files here, or anim settings files I should say, you won't get the animations displaying. And with that, that part of the import process is all over. And that completes this tutorial. If you've got any questions, ask in the comments and I'll try to reply to them. I'm on Slack most days and occasionally I check the forums as well.